So we're on to our last one, which is the kingdom apologetic.
Okay.
Now, this one, really, when it comes to Faithworks and CDM, this is the penultimate of what we're trying to say, is that we're missing a lot in Christianity. Is the idea of God doesn't just call us to be saved so that someday we can go to heaven and be free from this terrible earth. He also expects us to act in such a way to bring the kingdom of heaven down. In other words, to see his will done on earth as it is in heaven. So the very fact, so the kingdom apologetic is about working amongst in our communities and in our systems of this world to bring them to the obedience of Christ and redeem them, so that people can see what it's like to be ruled by God and how wonderful it is. Because people need to know that God and his ways are right and glorious and just.
Right.
So if you think about the song Joy to the World, we sing it at Christmas, but actually it's supposed to be a kingdom come kind of anthem. And it says the glories of his righteousness and the wonders of his love. And so it says that that his kingdom and that his rule is going to show that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we can give a taste of that fullness of the coming of the king by working in our educational systems, by working in our government systems, by working within our communities to bring things into that right rule. Right. And so what I mean by that is, like, for instance, we elect godly leaders that actually are going to put good things into practice, where we root out corruption. So if we know that we have a problem with corrupt cops in our area, or that our politicians are being corrupt, we help root that stuff out. We figure out who's doing wrong and bring them to justice.
So this gets down to the stuff that we see over and over again in Scripture, where it says God does not okay with people oppressing the poor. He is not okay with widows and orphans being not taken care of. Instead, he wants that stuff to happen. So we are to partner with God in living out these things and taking care of those that can. In fact, last night, as I was reading through Fast Company magazine, just making some different notes, I was like, we are to be looking for those places where injustice is being done, and we are to usher in justice and love and kindness. In fact, Christian innovation should move away from giving us more comfort in our church services or in our culture, and Christian innovation should focus on doing what it takes to see God's kingdom come and his will done on earth as it is in heaven, in meeting the needs of the poor, in meeting the needs of the widows, in meeting the needs of the fatherless, in taking care of things like curing cancer, or any of those things that is part of this broken, fallen world that was not a part of God's design from the beginning. So we are, in fact, joining him to see those things happen and turning our full attention.
And that's something that's what we were talking about earlier, is the fact of, where is the Christian innovation? Where are we even encouraging Christians to be innovative and to be the forefronts of all these fields in curing diseases and creating inventions and stimulating economies and trying to, help the, heal societies? Why are we not in the forefront of all these fields? Because God has created all these things, and we want to show off how great and how wise and how good he is. And so we need to do good for our communities. And when we do so, when we serve and when we love and we serve and we show how God's ways make everything right and good and peaceable, it allows people to be able to see, oh, this is a true king. This is a king we're serving. This is a king worth following. And so, so when we don't do this, and we are experiencing right now in America, the consequences of, as Christians have more and more not done this, the consequences is that people who are godless stands up to try to do these things. And they, of course, are doing it a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times in the wrong way. And it brings a lot of oppression. Somebody has a problem with injustice. They stand up and say, well, then we need to do this. We need to make those other people pay. We need reparations, and we need to force people to treat us right. And they do it in such a way that actually is oppressive in turn. So in other words, in a vengeful way a lot of times. And so, but that's because we as Christians haven't stood up and said, this is what true justice would happen. Yes, it would punish the evildoer, but only to the level that it needs to be, and then not punish innocents, and not oppress other peoples because you're just angry. And so it's this, if we do not step forward with the right answer and what God's answer is, we can't blame other people for trying to step up and do something. But a lot of times, like I said, it's not the right thing to do. And so we have only ourselves to blame for just abdicating a lot of these things up to other people. But like I said, this kingdom apologetic, what it'll do is all together, it'll use us a lot of the apologetics that we just said before to give people a visual picture of, see, this is what God actually wanted.
Right.
He wanted us to live in peace and harmony and for things to be prosperous. Because guess what? We follow God's ways. Overall, we're going to be prosperous.
Right. Exactly.
At least we're going to have everything that we need. And so, people aren't going to go hungry and things like that. So we need to make sure that as we live with our fellow man, that we're living in such a way in this kingdom apologetic to show that God's rule is the best. So all of these apologetics here that we've talked about, it's just different ways in which we reveal who God is, that things that people need to know for them to be able to truly accept God and to accept the claims of Christ in their lives.
And by revealing who God is in each of these different areas, we begin to make it possible for us to go over barriers or gaps or chasms between them and God, to get to a point where we can read scripture together and they can actually begin the process of being discipled. And so just to recap what those 7 things are, we have the evidential worldview apologetic, we have the love apologetic, we have the prayer apologetic, we have the narrative apologetic, the holy apologetic, the art apologetic, and the kingdom apologetic. And the viewpoint of all of those, or the goal of all of those, is simply to open the door for people to begin their journey towards Christ. For some, it may be a very short journey because they've been ready and there was one thing standing in the way. For others, it may be the beginning of a much longer journey because they have a lot of questions that need to be answered as they explore the God. But either way, the goal of this is not to stoke our own self, not to make us feel good by putting other people down, not to make us feel better about what we believe because we have the best arguments, but instead to point to Jesus Christ. Christ is all. And if we do anything that takes away from him and his glory, then we're actually not being apologetic.
Yes, because apologetics is not about winning. It's about wooing.
That's good.
It's about drawing people into the kingdom. It's not about building up our sense of ourselves. It's about showing others and realizing that they are in the kingdom of darkness and we want them to be in the kingdom of light. And we understand where we came from. We were once in the kingdom of darkness ourselves. We didn't understand. We had objections. We had misunderstandings. We don't always know the answers as Christians. So we often fall short as Christians. So this is just our bit, like, please consider Christ and how wonderful he is. And this is how, so look at all these apologetics. I ask all of you guys out there, look at these apologetics and say, where do I fall short? Are there areas in my life that I am not showing the right things about God? I'm not living, like, for instance, I'm not living a joyful life. And so I'm complaining and I'm, looking miserable all the time. What is that saying about God? I'm not showing love to my neighbors or to the people around me like I should. What is that saying about God? Does he really care? I'm not involved in any of my, community stuff out there. So what does that say about God? Does he care about our community problems? Does he have anything in which to help with our community problems? Does following God even make a difference in this world?
Right.
So, these are all things. What are we saying about God when we don't do these things? And how can we instead, by our actions and attitudes and the way we live? And here's a real key to it. And this is having to do with both the holy and the prayer apologetic. We have to actually be. If we don't have a relationship with God, if we're not developing that relationship, if he is not a living, breathing part of our daily lives, then we'll have nothing to share with this world. So no wonder our lives are not apologetic. No wonder they don't tell of him, because he's really not that big of a part of our lives. He's just a tack on. He's just a theoretical basis for our arguments.
A rabbit's foot.
Yeah, or a rabbit's foot. Like, oh, I want this now. It's just like, he's not the true king of our hearts. He's not the true friend that we walk with.
Right.
And so this is what we want to be able to show people in the different ways we can. And hopefully later on, I want to be able to do a series that goes down into even more ways in which, and each of these apologetics and how we can do that. But thanks so much for listening to this podcast. That you're listening to the Faithworks podcast, which is the signature podcast of the Faithworks media. And I'm Beck Ewing. This is Paul Watson. Thanks for listening, and go out there and be a world changer.